Hey, thanks, Luca. And thanks for those of you who are here today. My name is Michelle Sobolak, and I'm an associate professor of practice and the director of teacher education at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm going to share today how our program in general and my personal work moved from foundational, culturally relevant and sustaining education work to methods coursework integration. I'll share a little bit of the history and the feedback that we have from our students on why this was a really big need in our programs, some of the challenges I faced in doing the work, and also some feedback from students this term that will help me really refine this work and even do better next time I'm teaching this. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful to Luca and our whole community of practice for being invited into this work and into this space, because I think that it really did improve my practice. It has me thinking deeply as the director of teacher education here on work we need to do more broadly. And I think we will have a better program and, most importantly, prepare students better to work with any children that they impact across the pre-K-12 continuum. So we will get started, but please feel free to interrupt me or jump in at any time. Just to kind of give you an idea of the work that we'll talk about today, introductions and an icebreaker up first. I hope to set the stage for you for the work that I did, the foundational coursework as an outline for what we had at Pitt, where we're going with that, the history of the course that I reimagined, which was a reading, writing methods course for pre-K to grade 1, and then thinking about the lessons that I learned this semester thus far and what I need to work on going forward. So we'll start with introductions and an icebreaker. If you can use chat to introduce yourself, your role, and your institution, and if you're willing to share your best piece of educational advice. I see Elizabeth and Luca. First of all, welcome, and also sharing their best pieces of advice. Do the work that does work for you. That sounds like great educational advice, and you can't edit anything until it's down on a piece of paper. I think sounds like great advice too, Elizabeth, and I wonder if you got that in your doctoral program, because that sounds like something my dissertation advisor would have told me when I had big ideas to get it down on paper. So as folks are coming in, they can add their name and role and institution to the chat and their best piece of educational advice. And we can revisit those too, just to learn, a little bit more with and from each other. But for time's sake, I will keep going and talk to you first about some things that our students were saying about our program. So we gather information from our students in a lot of different ways, certainly the more traditional way of course evaluations, but also end of program surveys, and then just anecdotally from advisors talking to students, course instructors talking to students. And here's some of what we took away that our students were saying. I grouped our programs in 2 ways. The first program is a combined accelerated studies in ed program that we call CASE. That's a dual cert program that certifies students in pre-K 4 gen ed and pre-K 12 special education. And it's an interesting program because it's 5 years. Students start their junior year, they come out with a bachelor's, a master's, and the 2 certifications. This program has historically had strong foundational equity courses built into it, and that has been deepened in years. So students had a lot of feedback from this program, and I tried to give some of the biggest takeaways we learned. Students in this program really feel like the foundational courses were giving them the history of U.S. educational system and introducing them to both U.S. and global educational issues. Probably not unlike other programming, though. We had students who identify as BIPOC talking about only hearing the troubled history that often inequitably impacted them or those that might look or be like them. And that same group of students feeling like they had to patiently stand by while white students grappled with the challenging U.S. history, especially around education and the inequitable educational outcomes. In our other teacher ed programs, we really feel like we were missing the foundational courses because we were treating them as prereqs to the program and therefore not necessarily knowing where those courses were being taken, the content of them. But our students were feeling like they were getting a lot of foundational information in their methods coursework. So historically, Pitt has had graduate-only teacher education for other content areas outside of CASE. So these are students in a 1-year MAT program. And they felt like their methods instructors were doing a great job of giving foundational information. But then what happened was they were feeling like they didn't have enough methods background. So not enough knowing how to teach math in culturally relevant and sustaining ways. And we attributed a lot of that to the fact that time was being taken up in the coursework doing the foundational work that wasn't built into the program necessarily. And so that was a real problem that we really need to address in those programs. So we decided to reimagine teacher education at Pitt, and what that looked like was we launched undergraduate teacher education in secondary content areas, world heritage language, and special education, and built into those programs are the important foundational courses and revised method courses. We launched a revised MAT program, so we didn't want to have one program without having the background in the foundational equity courses. So that program in the secondary content areas and world and heritage language offers the foundational coursework as bookends. We also launched a revised special education program that shares the bookend foundational coursework. And then we're relooking at our CASE program to decide that it should really share the foundational coursework of the revised teacher ed and grad programs. We really think it would be the best way to leverage the newly developed courses for the benefit of all of our students. And it will also allow students across programs to learn with and from each other. We have a really siloed programming right now, and sharing that coursework will be really important to try to put an end to some of that siloed work. The way these programs look now, as I mentioned, CASE has had a history of including the foundational coursework in the programming. And you can see on that left-hand side, the list of courses that are there: developmental meanings of cultural distinction, teaching globally and locally in diverse worlds, attentional teaching practices, foundations of special ed, and teaching English language learners. We see that teaching English language learners in the foundation of special ed also in our new undergrad and revised grad programs. These programs, because they don't hold the dual special ed certification, have 6 additional required credits from PDE for special education as well. These are completely revamped courses on supporting students in inclusive classrooms and supporting literacies, which has a strong disciplinary literacy focus. This program also has critical histories of education and cultures, knowledge, traditions, and social systems of schooling in it. If you have any questions about the content of those courses, I'm happy to share out. But what we think that we will do is take the first 2 courses in CASE and swap them out with critical histories of education and the cultural knowledge, traditions, and social systems of schooling, so that we have all of our teacher education students taking those 2 core classes along with teaching English language learners and foundations of special ed. So the course that, as I mentioned in the beginning, that I worked on for this project was Reading Writing Methods 1, Pre-K to Grade 1. This course was developed at Pitt when PDE changed the certification band for elementary education from K-6 to Pre-K-4. It has taken place with and without a field placement as we've revised programs and thought about best practice. Currently, the vast majority of students in the course do have a field placement, which I love as a course instructor, and I think really helps us think about culturally relevant and sustaining education more deeply, because the students are seeing things in action. They can really think about what's happening, the good, the bad, what might be missing in a school site, as well as what we're talking about and how to kind of marry those two things. So in the current term, I have 46 students in this class. The majority are placed in a kindergarten placement within Pittsburgh Public Schools. So we see 32 of the students there. We have another 4 students in a pre-K or kindergarten placement who are in a graduate pre-K-4 one-year certification program. And the remaining 10 students are from the undergrad teacher ed program and not currently in a placement. So it does have a bit of a challenge because the majority of students are placed and then some are not. So thinking about how we implement assignments, how we talk about what we're seeing out in the field has to also work for and support the students who aren't currently in a placement and haven't been yet in their programming outside of an observation placement for Foundations of Special Ed. What I really love about having these 3 groups of students work together, though, is they're just coming from different backgrounds, different places. They've entered the field with, different content focus, different certification aspirations, and that really allows some depth to the conversations we have, and it allows us to have a more diverse, student population in the class. So when I think about what I thought was going well, and I think some of it truly was, and other things certainly needed some work, I want to be candid about what I thought was going well in the course, and things I kept and things that I changed based on my different learning. So in the beginning of this course, I often shared a history of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is considered often one of the most livable cities, but if you dig deep into educational outcomes, living, transportation, not everybody would certainly agree that Pittsburgh is one of the most livable cities. I think it's a great thing to have on marketing. It's a great way that the city loves to talk about ourselves, but the inequitable outcomes in education and living really show us that it's not most livable for all of our citizens. At the University of Pittsburgh, we have a Center on Race and Social Problems, and they put out periodic reports on the state of Pittsburgh. These periodic reports look at education, but they also look at transportation, housing, home ownership, maternal education level. I mean, you name it. And it's a painful look at a segregated city. And I used to launch the class with this because I wanted students to understand the context in which they were teaching. Because the majority of the students are seniors at Pitt, they're not all from Pittsburgh or even the region. And so I thought that they needed to understand the city that they were going to be teaching in. This course has always centered literacy as an issue of social justice, freedom, and equity. And that's a thread that I hope continues in the current class as well. For students to understand when we're talking about educational equity, that helping students become literate is a really important key to their ability to meet their goals in life. We also, in this course, always taught about the rule structure of all dialects, the respect that we need to have for multilingual and multidialectical families and students, and positioning ourselves in as humans who speak multiple dialects, even if we haven't noticed that before. We also challenged the shared preconceived notions about community and family support structures that often came up. So with a number of students that were out in the field in Pittsburgh Public Schools, and that school structure, the community, the identities of the students might look really different. So we did careful work around understanding differences in communities, understanding that students have to be able to put aside bias, that they have to think more deeply about how families and communities love and support students. And that might look really different than it looked for their family or community, but there's multiple ways to get to the same end. But I always knew, just like with anything and any course, there were things that needed work. One thing that I didn't feel like was going well in this course, that there wasn't a cohesive thread that forefronted the justice work. So we talked about it a lot. It was popping up all over the place, but I didn't feel like the thread was there throughout the course. I was also struggling with creating assignments that required students to carefully consider culturally relevant and sustaining education instruction in the resources that they use to teach their students, and really deeply thinking about their student population. I also knew we needed a big review of the authorship of the text, because it certainly wasn't representative of the field or our country. And I knew the course goals needed work. As I'll admit on a later slide, I honestly had never really looked at them. They seemed boilerplate to me from when the course was approved, and I never put enough thought into those. I also learned a lot, and I only capture a snapshot here from attending the PDC summits that happen yearly. There was a powerful student group at the summit that were students who were BIPOC students, and talked about the challenges that they often experience when all we talk about is the challenging history of our country that can be re-traumatizing. Talking about courses missing joy and success, and talking about the need for students to have to patiently wait while students who maybe have not had marginalized or existences that have been marginalized by others, as they learn and grapple with these inequities. That one really resonated because we had heard it frequently from our own students as well. And so it really made me think about this class, especially how I launched the class, which admittedly was depressing the first couple classes as we looked at the Pittsburgh report. I think it was critical information, but I think launching the class with it was where I was going wrong. And so instead, in my reimagined course, I launched with the first chapter of Unearthing Joy from Goldie Mohammed. And we also had some discussion questions that both supported what we learned from the chapter, and also talked about, how we could build community by sharing our experiences and thinking deeply about the work we were going to do together. And I had noticed a really distinct change in launching the course with joy versus, the Pittsburgh report, which, is brought up later because it's hugely important to think about the challenges that are in our current context and for where the students are going out into. But I think launching from joy helped to build the thread of joy throughout the class. So the other work that we are doing at the University of Pittsburgh is a real focus on reimagining teacher education department-wide and school-wide. I told you what that led to in terms of new courses, new programs, and new opportunities for our students. It sounds probably insane to people at other universities that we did not have undergrad teacher education, but that was a deliberate choice in the 80s, and one that was a hard-fought battle to change. And one that I think is really re-energizing our department and the school to invite in undergrads. We know that undergrads across Pitt are a more diverse student population than we were seeing. And we had 3 goals in developing new programs: to have students be able to enter the field of teaching in a way that wasn't attached to graduate enrollment costs. So we needed to address cost. We needed to address content. And I mentioned some of the foundational content changes while still leveraging the strong background that students were getting in our School of Arts and Science. And what really was most important to us is really doing some concrete work to diversify the teacher pipeline. We know developing a program won't just do that, but we think it's one step that we can start to recruit students into our programs. Under the leadership of our former dean, Valerie Kinlock, we also have a new mission vision for our School of Education that I have on the screen here for you to take a look at. And it really is supposed to guide all the work that we do. This mission vision is something we recite at school-wide meetings. It's on all of our syllabi, which if you take a look at my syllabi from the website, you will see that. It's also projected in our hall spaces. We have videos playing of students and faculty talking through the mission vision. So it really is a guiding force and supposed to always be our touch point for the work we do. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, I was granted this opportunity to engage in this community of practice that really has taught me so much from colleagues that are involved, from the leadership in the program, and really had me focused on the work that I needed to do for my course. So I mentioned those course goals. I already admitted I never paid any attention to them, but when I really sat down and looked at them, I realized honestly how pathetic they were. I believe that the revised version is a better representation of what the course is intending to do. And I'll share kind of the chart that shows you my previous course objectives that I adopted when I started teaching this course versus my revised course objectives. I think this is a living document and one that I'll need to continue paying attention to and putting work in with, something that I hadn't done before. But what you can see from this chart is I reduced the number of learning objectives. And I hope that they are starting to sound like the real goals of the course and what students can expect to get from the course, what I want them to take from the course, and what they should hold me to as the course instructor of this course. So I'll just give you a moment to look at those. Just as a point of discussion, if we look at this last course objective, the previous objective was to become familiar with the kinds of teachers and student resources used to teach literacy. And then the revised course objective, that was really benign. I mean, it could be any resource, a quality resource, a research supported resource, one that works on CRSE, who knows, right? But I think that the revised course objective speaks to what I really hope students will do, to critically evaluate literacy resources and utilize carefully curated and varied resources to teach literacy that are culturally appropriate and consider student and community background and fund of knowledge. So I think that speaks much more specifically to what the important role that a literacy educator has to do, which is really look critically at the resources and choose resources that meet the goals that they have for their students. The second piece of the puzzle was really looking at the authorship for my course, and we needed to do, a careful study of this. The previous course that I taught used 2 core texts, both authored by white authors, and a collection of practical research articles. In and of themselves, I liked the core text. One really was a basic core text for an early literacy educator, so provided lots of examples, definitions, resources. And the second was a more practical teacher book, The Making Sense of Phonics text, which is co-authored by Professor Emerita Isabel Beck from Pitt. I did keep that text because I think it aligns closely with the work I'm doing in the class and also with the structured literacy. But I moved away from having one key core text, and that was really helped me to diversify the text and chapter authorship of the text that we use in class. So now when I look at the core text and chapters that the course is built around, 55% of the authorship identifies as white, 22.5% identify as Black, and 22.5% identify as Latina. I recognize that I have only currently addressed the identity, race as an identity, and I need to think about other identities as well. And I also need to take a deeper look and work on select article authorship. I'm using a lot of the same articles I've used previously, and they are meeting the needs of the content of the class, but I need to do a deeper dive at what the identity background is of those authors, and then consider places that I need to make changes if that authorship isn't as diverse as I hope it would be. One of the big pieces of work that we did here at Pitt, and I cannot take all credit for this, is to revise our lesson plan. We did not have a shared lesson plan across all our programming and content areas. We did not have a lesson plan that really showed any focus on our desire for educational equity. And so one thing that we did as a teacher education faculty was get to work on a shared lesson plan. This seemed like an insurmountable goal when we started, because it's really hard to take people who are really married to the lesson plan format they use and ask for change, but it was asking everybody for change. And I think when we had these discussions as a faculty, we really acknowledged the fact that we knew there was lots of work to do. We had frustrations from students and mentor teachers. We had, frustrations from field supervisors that we were using many different formats, and it was hard to help students think about the things that they needed to think about in teaching students when we were going about it in so many different ways. I think Luca's going to drop the lesson plan format into the chat. I think perhaps he already did. So you can take a look at that. It's also available on the repository website. Absolutely open to any comments or feedback about that lesson plan. We are trying it out for the first time, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I've learned thus far about using this lesson plan in my course. Some of the ways that we tried to forefront our focus on equity in the lesson plan was you can see in the rationale and background, it guides students to consider why the learning goals are important for the students, how it fits into the larger sequence of learning experience, and how it connects their students' identities and backgrounds. It also asks them to draw upon the previous skills and knowledge. One of the things we want to work really hard with our novice teachers on is building relationships and deeply knowing their students. And this asks them to speak to that from a planning perspective. Also in the section we call reflection in advance of teaching, we ask students to consider their own students' needs, preferences, identities, and resources to provide specifics for individual students if that's appropriate. We ask them to think about their language, what kind of questions they'll ask, what kind of language they'll use, and what scaffolding they'll provide. In the course that I'm teaching, this has been a real key area. The number of students who speak English as a second or multiple language in the students' kindergarten classrooms is pretty high. And so this has really caused students to stop and reflect on the type of language they're using and how they will scaffold and support multilingual speakers in their classrooms. It also asks them to consider their resources, so the accessibility and relevance of resources and materials for students. And coming up, I have an example where I think a student did this well when she realized that the resource that the core curriculum was asking her to use really had no relevance to her student. She didn't think they would engage well with it. And so her mentor teacher and her worked together, and she was allowed to make changes in the resources that she taught the lesson with. And she speaks to a little bit to how that worked with her students. You'll see that accessibility piece there. This lesson plan goes across programs that are general ed and special ed. And then we also are very careful when we're thinking about the diverse identities of students to consider students who have special learning needs as one of those identities. As students are planning their lesson, we ask them to think about the misunderstandings and plan for differentiation for their students. So asking them to think ahead about what students might misunderstand, and then also to think about, what support will they be able to provide for students, what kind of scaffolding will be there, and why are they using it. And then in the post-lesson reflection, after the lesson is taught, we ask students to think about how the lesson truly did connect with their students' culture, identity, strengths, interests, and needs. This has been a really interesting way that my students have spoken back to the lesson plan, because they think they thought they were deeply thinking about how they planned the lesson and the resources they picked. And then maybe they found in this post-lesson reflection something they might change going forward. And that's often pushing themselves outside of the curricular materials to think about materials and ways that they might teach students that provide some differentiation, that consider students, varied identities, and what they might build on for the instruction they'll have in the future. Another way I tried to think about bringing in the culturally relevant and sustaining PDE competencies was treating them as a core text for the class. So you can see here it is an example that we started the term with. Students had read chapter 1 of Unearthing Joy, as I mentioned previously. They also had to read the PDE structured literacy competencies for pre-K 4, and then the culturally relevant and sustaining framework as core text for the class. And then they came to class with their 3 biggest takeaways and their wonderings about the framework and how they relate to the Unearthing Joy chapter. Because this was the first time I led with Unearthing Joy, I really didn't know how students would do with this assignment, but they really came with really thoughtful takeaways and wonderings from this work. Some were really focused on how might I do this? I want to do this well, but I feel like I have a long way to go. So we certainly reassured, students that that was to be expected. And this is what these method courses are going to ask them to do and provide feedback and support, as well as their field supervisor and other course instructors and mentors would do. And some came with a little bit of pushback. It brought us back to the civility statement that we had for the class that was also refined from this work in the community of practice, with an opportunity for students to respectfully share their opinions, and that they really had to have some research or data to support that. So this discussion went longer than the class period that I had anticipated or planned for. But I think it became a powerful way for students to hear each other and to really think about the need for the structured literacy and culturally relevant and sustaining framework competencies. I don't know that everybody in the class was there on day 1, but I think we moved the needle for students to understand why these were really important frameworks to build our literacy instruction out of. One of the big areas of need, and probably continued areas that I need to put some focus on, are the course assignments. If you recall, one of the challenges for this course and challenges I had as a course instructor was thinking about how to have a consistent thread of CRSE work throughout the course. And so I had to consider the course assignments. The course assignments are very lesson plan heavy. For most of the students in the class, if not all, this is the first time they're introduced to lesson planning at all. So that's already a big challenge in the course, that not only do I have to teach how to write a solid and effective literacy lesson plan, even how to teach the lesson plan, right? How to write a lesson in general. What are the key elements? How much detail? What do you need to be thinking about? We spend a good amount of time doing that at the beginning of the term. And it's a challenge and continues to be a challenge for some students. And luckily, they will have many more methods, courses, and experiences to do this work. I also needed to revise my course assignments to think about how do I help kids, our students really think about more diverse resources. So how can I provide them with access to things that they might be able to use that they don't know offhand? They're new in the field, they're novice, they're in their first placement. And how do I give them resources and then ask them to seek out similar resources when crafting the plan? So not falling back necessarily just on, well, the curriculum says this, or my mentor teacher gave me this book that they used all the time, but how to really think about how do they deeply know their students, and how do they spend the time to seek out resources that will help their students connect with what they're teaching. There were other simple changes. Students today, in fact, turned in their read aloud discussion plan, that they're using a book that has a little bit of meat to it, and we're doing a text talk like lesson with it, teaching tier 2 vocabulary as well as more higher order questioning. I used to provide a book list, and students always just chose from that list. And this time I challenged them to choose a text that represents at least some of the identities of the students they taught and to provide a justification for that choice. So lots of communication, lots of emails. What do you think about this book? Here's why I'm picking it. And I'm really noticing as they turned in this assignment today that they were really, really thoughtful about the book that they chose and how they had to explain to me why it was a good choice versus me giving them a list of books and they just ran over to the public library and took out whatever was available. They always did well on this lesson plan, but now I think it's an opportunity for them to really choose a resource that matches the identities of their students. At the end of the term, we will also be watching the documentary, The Right to Read. I know that's a pretty popular one right now around the structured literacy focus for the state. We will engage in a guided discussion about the documentary, and then they'll have a reflection outside of class that asks them to tie the content of what they saw with the course content, specific course readings, as well as the two frameworks, structured literacy and culturally relevant and sustaining. We're not at this point yet, so I can't speak to how that is taken up by the students, but I'm really looking forward to this as being the last assignment in the class and what I hope will help them put all the pieces together in thinking about the work that we've done this term. I mentioned that I would show you an example of a student who was really challenging the resources that were in the curriculum that she was teaching. So this student was writing a phonological awareness lesson plan, and the content from the course she was teaching asked her to use the song Down by the Bay. And she asked me if I thought 5-year-olds would know that song. And I said, probably not, but you can always teach it. And kids love, when there are songs that you might use with them. And she was puzzling for a while and she's like, I just don't think they're going to care. And I said, yeah, I don't think there's anything about Down by the Bay that is special to the kids that you're teaching and that they really might connect to. So what else might you use? And so with her mentor teacher's permission, she went out to look for other songs and other videos that she thought might better engage her students. And she found a Gracie's Corner video, and she's speaking to how her students who identify as predominantly Black really engaged with that video because they saw people that were like them on the screen. And then she speaks more generally about kids to say the beat was more enjoyable. So it was something, more connected with students today than, Down by the Bay might have been. And she talks about the students being up and dancing and having a good time while also being engaged. And you can see the rest of her reflection there that she talks about, why that met her students' needs, especially students. And I would say all students in kindergarten and beyond are this way, who need to be up and engaged in their learning. And then also her reflection on something she'd personally changed, which is how she gives directions. And I think that's a common novice teacher refrain. So what are some lessons that I have learned thus far? One is that I think that the students feel that the CRSE is generally a focus of this class. I won't know, until I have end of term course evals. They may be mixed on if students liked this as a focus, but anecdotally, and from what I hear students talking with other course instructors and their field site supervisors they see that this is something they must pay attention to in this class and that they're provided with opportunities to put culturally relevant and sustaining literacy instruction into action. In our course evals for all our courses in the School of Ed are tied to the mission vision. So students are going to be asked to reread the mission vision and talk about how the course met it. And I think that will be an interesting evaluation question for this particular class. And I think I have a lot to learn from what students think about that. I also learned early on that students really needed more guidance for how to determine which CRSE competency really was the focus of their lesson. So we had to spend a good bit of class time dissecting the competencies, and we determined, that the competencies in groups 4 and 8 were best matched to the lesson plans we were writing. So early on, I was getting students who may be attached, for an example, the CRSE competency 7C is honor and respect the home language of learners and their families. And they would connect that to their lesson. And then I would read the lesson and I would say, well, the lesson's fully in English. I don't see any way that they're incorporating another language. They're not talking about it. And so when asking students, well, why did you choose that? A student might have indicated, well, that competency is really important to me. And I agree with them fully. But if it didn't match the lesson they were teaching, it wasn't the right one to connect. I want them to keep that focus on that competency and the importance of it, but it didn't match the lesson they were teaching. So we talked about how we're not just picking the framework competencies that we're most drawn to, that we value. They're all important, but what matches the actual lesson that we're teaching and the work that we're doing with kids. This course also has a current event assignment where in pairs, students pick an educational current event to have the class read and to have some discussion questions. This has always been a part of this course because I believe deeply in having students staying abreast of the field of education. There's so much going on all the time. Increasingly, education is so much in the news, and I want to make sure students are tuned into that. And what I noticed this term is that our focus on culturally relevant and sustaining education is finding its way into the current events that the students are picking. I think some of that is just the day and age we're in. And I hope other pieces of it are around their interest and their focus and their belief in the work that they're doing. So we've had articles around the legal battles that PDE is facing with this framework, on book bans, on inequitable instruction for students with IEPs, lots of things around teacher advocacy and the way students might take that up in their own lives. I also learned from implementing the lesson plan that the format is generally positive. I think students are receiving it and they're doing well, but there are some redundancies that we need to talk about as a faculty. So for example, the reflection and anticipation of teaching, students sometimes are asking, what do you want me to put here versus here? I think I answered them both. And they're right. I think we just needed to see it in action so we can do some refinement of what we're asking students to address, that we're keeping the core and important pieces of it, and we're taking out the redundant parts of it. I think the students, and this onus is on me to do this, would benefit from some more concrete lesson plan examples to see culturally relevant and sustaining literacy instruction in action. I did provide this at the beginning of the term, but I think they need more examples. I think students need something concrete as a touchstone as they develop their own work. The course assignments, we have the persistent challenges of writing lesson plans when the students aren't in a placement. It's really hard to consider your student identity if you don't have a student that you're thinking about or a group of students you're thinking about. So I need to be creative in thinking about the students who aren't in placements and how they can do work that doesn't just feel like, they're trying to think about student identities, but how can I help them at least have a class or a fictitious class to drop from? Many of the pre-student teachers are in their first site, and at this point, those teachers are adopting a new series. It didn't always allow, or it doesn't always allow, for them to modify lesson goals or resources. I know from being a teacher who had a new ELA series at one time, you're buried by it, right? And so the teachers aren't yet in a place or a space that they can necessarily allow some of these things to be changed up as they're trying to learn the new ELA series themselves. Also, in our conversations today around differentiating instruction, students were speaking to their teachers saying, I want to be doing more of that, but I don't yet know the curriculum well enough to know where to put that in. And I do have to do more work on the ways that pre-student teachers are choosing resources and activities. So they're not just dialing that piece in or saying, did you consider your student identities? Yes. And some lesson plans have said things like, yes, my student loves animals, so I'm using animal rhyming cards. Well, it is important to know your students' likes and affinities, but I don't know that that's necessarily getting us as close to the culturally relevant literacy instruction that we're hoping for. So there could be a stepping stone to really deeper thinking about that. So that has been my journey thus far. I am really interested to hear your thoughts on it and anything you have to share from your own experiences that might help me deepen the work that I'm doing. I also wanted to share my email address because I'd love to hear from folks after idea sharing. And also as part of this project, we also have some coaching available for other folks who are thinking about this work and might want to be partners that way. So I open it up to you to see if I can answer any questions, provide any clarity, or you can share with me your thoughts on the work that you're doing.
Hi, Michelle. This is Trish Jorgensen. I'm in Philadelphia. I want to thank you very much for sharing this, and Luca putting the your reflections and things like that, the link in the chat. So I have those open also. This was so helpful, but I don't know, it helped frame how I'm gonna look at the CRSE repository. That it just helped me to understand your process more.
Oh, thanks,
So,
Trish. I'm glad it was helpful. And I think we're working together on the pre-K4
yes, we
group.
are.
Yeah, so it's nice to meet in this way as well. And really all credit goes to the community of practice, because they really structured out this work for us to think carefully about all the necessary elements, things that I don't know I would have thought of on my own. So certainly credit to the group, including Luca, who led this effort.
Yeah, I was interested in the the big change you made with starting with the Pittsburgh history.
Yeah.
And then, because I'm sure um I can imagine myself, if I were teaching the class, like, oh yeah, we're getting into it, right? Like from the very start. And then, but like seeing it from another point of view, like, sort of robbing the joy. And so I wrote down the story, Unearthing Joy. I want to check out that book.
Yeah, I've really liked that it's new, to the course this year. We're only using select chapters, but I've liked it thus far, and I felt better about how the class started. Those first couple of sessions when I was using the Pittsburgh report, I thought were critical for the work we were doing, but to launch a class that way was really rather depressing for myself included. And I think I may have unintentionally added to some of the deficit perspective that students might have brought into teaching in a school site that looked different than theirs. It was never my goal. I would have never wanted that to happen, but I think that was an unintentional consequence. And so forefronting the joy and the history that, is so rich in our nation of the Black literary societies, I think was just a much more uplifting and engaging way to invite students into a literacy class.
And can I ask a question? You, at one point, I thought you said that the students were seniors. Is this the CASE program? Is that they're getting their undergraduate and master's degree sort of at the same, in a 5-year program?
They are. The majority of the students, the 32, are in that program. So they're in their senior year. This is their second year with us in the School of Ed. They took many foundational classes and things that were bringing them to the senior year methods coursework, and they're in pre-student teaching this year, and they'll do their student teaching during the grad year in both a gen ed placement in the fall and a special ed placement in the spring.
Okay.
It's a wonderful program, if, for a student who can commit to the 5 years. It's, a lofty thing to do when you're 18.
Yeah.
But great outcomes, and they have a lot of job prospects at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the and I'll stop talking. I don't want to monopolize, but yeah, having a standard lesson plan format so that all the methods are using that. So we have that, but then we get complaints that everybody does it a little differently. But I love the really pulling in the competencies, CRSE, SAS, certainly CRSE and the structured literacy in the document, and really documenting the, your reflection that this is what we do. This is what teachers do before, during, and after, kind of.
Yeah, it's crazy to think the resistance we had to going to the shared format. So we had tried years ago and failed. And then this year with the new programs and the revised programs, I think was just the right time. And have asked colleagues and, who teach students in other programs, and they also are having positive feedback. So I think we'll have some tweaking to do, but I think we have a great start.
Michelle, I have a question if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
I know you said that there are the 10 undergrad students who aren't having field placements for this particular course. I guess the two-part question. One is, are there plans to change that? Or is that like too much credit load for them? That's, I guess, maybe the biggest question. And two, like, are there other places that they do have field placements, or is it just not yet in their sequence? Or, what's the picture there?
Yes. So yeah, the students who are in our teacher ed program are in the special ed content area. And what I love about what my special ed colleagues have done is required reading coursework for students in special education, recognizing the number of students who have IEPs have a requirement that students take from a list of literacy methods coursework. Because this is our first year of the program, we had some students who are further in their studies at Pitt who wanted to stay and complete the major, even though they weren't aware it was a possibility when they started the program. And so they're not in a placement. I think that's going to be almost a one-off for this year, though. And then they will all be in a placement, both pre-student teaching and student teaching. These students will be in pre-student teaching next term and student teaching and graduating next fall. But I think when we are able to market this program from when students are in high school, we will see a trajectory that the vast majority of students who are taking the literacy will also be in pre-student teaching. And that's really, I think, going to be a better fit for writing lesson plans and thinking deeply about this.
Hi, Michelle, I have one last question. Oh, yeah, one more.
Please.
So, what's the format in which the class is delivered? Is this like 3 1 hours, a 3 hour? Is it 2 1.5 hours? Is it blended?
It's 2 1 hour and 15 minute. And that has been a change for us as well. We were teaching our methods courses even to, the undergrads in this CASE program in one session 2.5 hour blocks. And we did switch that to 2 session 1 hour and 15 minutes. And that's been a wonderful change, I think. I think 2.5 hours is long to engage students. You won't see them again until the next week. I think that was a better way that we might work with grad students than we are working with undergrads. So yeah, 2 1 hour and 15 minute sessions.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I also have another question, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, please.
You mentioned that the students might find it helpful to include more like examples of lesson plans, given that some of them don't have that much exposure to that at this point. And I was curious if you know where you are going to go for those things, because I know just like seeing like what does this actually look like is a huge thing that a lot of people are interested in, and maybe it's just that those need to be developed and someone needs to sit down and kind of see what that would actually look like. But I'm curious if you have places that you're hoping to look, other than I know the PEDC rubric that aligns with the competencies has a lot of examples in it, but not necessarily literacy specific. So that might be a place for some examples, but I'm curious if there are other places that you'll be going for that.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things I'm considering. One, working with the literacy faculty here to curate examples. I think connecting with our really skilled and excellent mentor teachers will help us do that. So of course, they're not writing lesson plans in this format, nor would any practicing teacher, have this much detail in lesson plans. But I think we can tap into some of our partnerships with the excellent mentor teachers to develop a set of example lessons. And then the other thing I'm doing is thinking about the lesson plans that were submitted this term that have been really exemplary, and asking those students if it might become a piece of our course going forward. Well, if there aren't any other questions, thank you so much for sharing your time, especially from 4 to 5. I know we're all at the end of our workday. So thank you for sharing your time and your questions and your thoughts. And please do reach out. I'd love the opportunity to partner with folks and think about, my next steps in revising this course and others, as well as, seeing if I can provide any insight to folks who are doing shared work. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time, Michelle, and for everyone for being here. I just put in the chat a link to a form where you can provide feedback, and you can also fill out that form if you're interested in connecting with Michelle for coaching or kind of thought partnership around any of this. Filling out that form is one way to get connected. And if you fill it out, I'll be in touch with you soon to kind of explore a little bit more about what you want to think through, what type of support you might like, and how you can get connected. So we'd love to hear from you that way or any other way that you want to be in touch with us. Thank you. I'll pause the recording there.